Hey everyone, welcome back to the Letter Drop podcast. Today we have a guest I'm super excited for, Ryan Baum. I've I met Ryan the first time at a Super Path happy hour, I think like a year and a half ago now, and I basically was I was in my very early days at Letter Drop and very persistent in terms of following up with him and getting some conversations. And then we just kind of like stayed in touch over the course of the year. Bumped into him a couple more times in New York. Yeah, and then since then we've just been friends. Ryan actually bought Letter Drop at his previous role at Gorgias, and that's super exciting. We still work with their team. And I've really loved following Ryan. He's started to be very active on LinkedIn. I see him all the time. And he has a lot of great thoughts on how content leaders need to be thinking about how the world's changing. And so this is a very special episode to me to just get Ryan's unfiltered thoughts, and also having seen these thoughts evolve over the course of a year and a half, I think is incredibly exciting. So with that, Ryan, would love for you to just maybe give your quick spiel to people, like who are you, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So it's funny. They're going to evolve. Those thoughts are going to evolve on this call in real time because I feel like every time we chat, we're aligned in values, but not always in execution, which is like the best way to discuss, right? Because we're aiming at the same goal, but we have different ideas of how to get there. And I think that can be like really clarifying. And actually, I just realized, I'm looking at the date, it was 2 years ago because it was like March of 2022. Yeah. Parthi was like, I'm in from San Francisco. I have this content tool. Can I tell you about it? And then he told me about it and it didn't work. We didn't have budget at the time. And then we did another demo like 6 months later and we did have the budget, but it wasn't where I needed it. And this is my favorite part. And one of my favorite things about Parthi in general, I gave him feedback after that call, right? And he was like, okay, cool. Got it. I'll hit you up in like 6 months. And I actually was one to hit him up because we had expanded the team really fast at the beginning of 2023. I went from like a 2-person team with me and another person, Jordan, to like having 5 people on the team. And so I went back to Parthi like, okay, I think it's actually time. Like this is not a want, but a need now. And Parthi literally pulled up the linear requests from the last time he had demoed me and they just added everything, but he didn't tell me. So when I got onto the demo, he was like, oh yeah, all those things you wanted. So they're part of the platform now. Here's like the board. So I always loved that. And I think like to brag on Letter Drop for a second, I think the reason that the app is so good and why I bought it at Gorgias was one of the last things I did is because, none of you are content people by background. And so you have worked so much harder to listen to customers, talk to customers, be where the customers are, do your own content marketing. Like everyone at Letter Drop is doing that. And so it's believable even more than if you had come from a content program but did nothing to actually prove those chops. So little brag on Parthi and the Letter Drop team. And yeah, so I'm excited to be here. I was at Gorgias, like I said, leading content until like October of last year. So I joined in December of 2021. And then 6 months in, we had like doubled traffic with the agency we were working with. And I used that as like leverage to make my first hire as an editor, which was the big unlock. Jordan's amazing. We like 4x from there because both he's faster and we were like not task switching nearly as much. And then I was able to like bring on another editor, a writer, and we got a video editor from another team. So really, really have so much. I'm really thankful for my time at Gorgias. It was tough, but it was special. Wouldn't do it again, but wouldn't go back and redo it either. I did it just enough.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear that story, and thank you. Thanks for taking those conversations with me, honestly, and like giving me that feedback. A lot of that did influence like how we build and like how we do things, and so it's really easy to just like brush off people. And so I really appreciate you for having taken the time. I'm glad that we can be here on this call now.
Yeah, I actually took a call with someone today for customer research, and I didn't really realize this, but I think actually it was you that made me start wanting. I've been doing it a decent amount because when I see someone who's very serious and moving in the right direction, I want to help them. I want to see them win. And even if it doesn't work for whatever reason or they can't implement it, like as we saw, like the relationship can persist. Maybe it'll work out later. So just like a half hour of your time really means a lot to that SaaS founder. And I think we forget that when we're like skipping those calls for like a meeting that could be an email internally.
Absolutely. Definitely do appreciate it on the other side. Let's talk about some big themes that are
Yeah.
going on right now in the marketing world, in the content world specifically. So I don't think this stuff was even around when we first chatted in 2022, but I guess like ChatGPT came out in November of 2022. Generative AI
Mm.
just became like mainstream in the past year. Um, and then we had like this macro shift that happened last year too. Like we're no longer in this zero interest rate world, and a ton of layoffs disproportionately
Yeah.
impacted marketing teams. A lot of it impacted content teams last year. A lot of content leaders are and ICs are maybe feeling uncertain about the future. Heck, like I think like everybody's feeling uncertain about the future. Like how far are we from like AGI and Sam Altman teasing Q Star and like GPT-5? But specifically, I feel like in the marketing world, a lot of people are trying to understand like, okay, when you can click a button and generate content in quotes, where does that leave you, and like how should you be thinking about this world? How do you communicate this to your team, to your management team? What is your value in this environment? Because I do think now more than ever, people with strong opinions who can stand out from the sea of sameness are able to provide value. That's like how we do get a lot of our business. So I'm curious to just sort of like get your high level take on what are the macro trends you see or things that you think have changed in the past year that have directly impacted content leaders.
So I think let's align at kind of a fundamental level before I answer that question. So when you look at everything that's happening, right? Talking about AI, talking about managing up, talking about proving your worth, layoffs, all these things. Not that they're tactical, but I think if you get to the root cause, all of it is like uncertainty, right? Uncertainty around change specifically. And looking at the future is always that, right? But the next 5 years could be so much of like a hard left that I think it's like, even if it's not more uncertain than 5 years ago to now, especially considering COVID, we didn't see COVID coming. We're seeing this coming. So I think that's what's creating a lot of the anxiety is that anticipation, right? Because no one knows. Like the only thing I know about the next 5 years in marketing or anything else is that nobody knows. Sam Altman, I am convinced, does not have all the answers, right? I'm sure he has plenty more than we do, but I don't think any of us really know how this is going to net out fully, right? And so there are definitely things we can do on each of these issues to navigate that uncertainty. But I do think that it's really important to point out that like that's actually what is the issue here is this navigation of uncertainty and the lack of security that people feel because of that uncertainty, right? In life and in business. And that makes people, I think, really put their hard shell on. And it makes it harder to do the things that you need to do to be successful, right? And so, with all of that kind of like aligning, I think that in general, the one like I try. I'm trying to give more observations lately because it's hard to give advice. You don't know all the context, and then if your advice goes badly, you feel bad. But one thing I know I can say is like you cannot stick your head in the sand right now. Like I have talked to a lot of content and marketing leaders in the past 5 months getting this consultancy up and running. And one of the most common trends, common threads that I've seen is smart people that I respect who are saying, yeah, I know this is going to change everything. I don't have time right now. You know what I mean? And I empathize with them because like I also didn't have time when I was in house. And it really wasn't until I like left Gorgias and had a couple months of not having a lot of responsibilities and could really like play with and tinker and experiment with all this AI that I started to really see the value, the potential of it. And so I understand where they're coming from, but that does not change the fact that the people that get left behind in marketing because of AI and all these changes aren't going to be the people that try and do it badly, because those people will learn and iterate from it. It's people that just ignore it and ignore it and ignore it, and then it's too late. And so I would say all of that. And then I would add that I think people are focusing on the wrong things when it comes to AI implementation. And I think that, I've been thinking about the midwit curve a lot recently. That meme, have you seen it with like the bell curve? And the
Oh
dude in the
yeah.
middle is, yeah, yeah, yeah. So Alex Burkett is a friend of mine in Brooklyn, and he loves this meme. And I think it's so funny because it really does kind of apply to literally everything. And so the midwit meme into me in this, occasion, and I'll use myself. I'll be the midwit, right? Just to be fair. When AI came onto the scene, I, like everyone else, was playing with it. And I was like, oh, AI is going to change the world, just like everyone else. And then I started trying to actually apply it to business. And I was like, this is a toy. This is not actually useful. That was when I was my midwit peak, right? That was not a great moment. But as I, continued down the bell curve to like the hooded sage, right? Not that I'm there yet, but I'm like somewhere in between. I really got back to this kind of like, yeah, AI is going to change everything, because when I played with it like a toy, I perceived it as a toy. When I spent time to actually do research and find use cases and tinker and iterate and like apply it to things that it's actually useful for, aka not thinking and writing, all of a sudden it becomes really powerful unlock. And so, yeah, I think if I could say one thing about AI to content leaders that I feel like would resonate and be useful across the board, even not knowing their context, is think about how AI could make the time that you're spending more valuable, not saving time, right? I think it's a big difference, even though it doesn't necessarily feel like it.
Gotcha. So just to play that back to you,
Yeah.
so you mentioned that the biggest issue right now is more so just this feeling of uncertainty because we don't know how things are changing. You mentioned that a lot of people are essentially ignoring
Mm,
AI because they're just like not quite certain on how to use things. And then you've essentially descended from the median of the midwit curve to actually realize, wait a minute, this actually is going to change everything.
yeah.
So, what would you tell past Ryan essentially? Like, so you're like, okay, like past Ryan is like content
Midwit
leader.
Ryan.
I like Ryan is a content leader at a great company,
Yeah.
and they're like super heads down. They have like all of these KPIs. They're trying to hit quarter over quarter. They're stressed. They have all this stuff they need to do, and they have this looming feeling that like everything is changing, but they don't have the time to explore. What would you tell them in terms of like very practically things that they need to be doing right now in order for them to not be caught off guard in like a year from now?
Right. Yeah. Um, okay. So here's where I go from that piece of advice back to just observations, right? Because not only have I not completely clarified these ideas for myself, but again, I'm looking specifically at my use cases. So I don't feel confident to be like applying it across the board. But for me, it's actually like a lot less understanding AI and more change management, actually, like conceptually. And so that's something I'm like trying to like understand better, like the psychology of decision making and change management in general, because let me just say, like I guess here's where I see a couple things going wrong when I talk to people about AI. Right, either they're not doing it at all, or they're trying to do it for everything. In one case, you're not doing anything at all. In the other case, you're also not doing anything at all because you're overwhelmed and it's not actually going through. So I think finding the things in your workflow that are the best AI use cases and the like most repeatable also, right? So if you have a small thing that you're doing 5 times a day, that's a great place to start with AI and automation, because what I'm finding with AI is that it's a lot of upfront investment. I think that's actually, I've not called it that, but I really like that. AI implementation, at least for content, I think is a lot about investment, because you're putting in a lot of work up front to change the way that you do things, to explore this new topic that you don't know, right? Potentially waste time trying to figure it out. But once you get it, then that's the most expensive run of that process you're ever going to see, right? Because from then on, you start paying yourself back in efficiency gains. Now, of course, unless you have like, I don't know, crazy Salesforce money, you're not going to be able to like have someone come in and do all of that up front. It's going to take some time that you have to pay back. So that's why I think doing something that's small and repeatable that is well suited to the AI will both give you and your boss kind of that like victorious feeling that gets the buy-in, both permission for yourself and explaining it to your boss to do the next thing and the next thing, and kind of roll the snowball, and it gets bigger over time. Because there's definitely things that we did at Gorgias that if I could like remove it from the process through proper AI and automation, that one little thing probably pays off like 100 hours by the end of the year. You know what I mean? Like, so it feels little, but with that repeatable aspect, not so much. And I was actually an XKCD comic about it where he has like a table of how long it takes you to do it, how often you do it, and then like how much you can spend automating it, and it's not an issue. But essentially, so that's step one, right? Like, so the change management of it, starting small, doing things that like objectively will make everyone's life better, right? And again, you're not gonna like even if you save 10 hours a week, your boss isn't gonna just let you chill for those 10 hours. So that's why I think this like time saving is the wrong way to look at it. It's more like if you're gonna have to spend 10 hours on the editorial process each week, maybe you get 5 posts out instead of 4 because you're able to move faster with these AI things. So the change management side's over here. And then on this side, I would say understanding what AI can and can't do, and not to go like full Jurassic Park, but like what AI should and should not do, right? So I think it's a large language model, language literally in the acronym. And I think people see that and they see writing as this like hard process that takes a lot of time. And so it's a natural fit. And the fact that it's like, we learned about AI through this like chatbot interface with ChatGPT just makes that even like an easier kind of like diversion. But I am not using AI to write at all. I have run some experiments out of curiosity to like write a specific section or things like that. And maybe if you have everything else outside of the thinking and the writing like completely covered, then go for it. Try to write with it too. But like, to me, the writing and the thinking that goes into the writing, and even the first draft, like I will not use GPT for a first draft. I'll use it to vet a draft. I'll use it to vet an outline and challenge me. But I want to do the first version, like just me, kind of raw, because I don't want any of that kind of, what's it called? Like, influence from the GPT. If I'm getting influence, I want it to be from like an SME. Like the SME is influencing the way I write this outline, not some kiddie pool GPT model. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say that is so fascinating. So we talked to lots and lots of marketers, a lot of content marketers,
Yeah.
and how people or what people ask us for varies very drastically
Mm-hmm.
across teams. We have a lot of companies or a lot of customers where they're just like, I bought this thing because I wanted it to do my job for me. And
Mm-hmm.
so they're just like, hey, like I wanted to write this for me, and I keep telling them like we can do that for you, and we can essentially do a mishmash of this existing SERP and give it back to you, and just like make sure we have everything covered. But I don't think that's what you want, or I don't think that's what you need as a business. And so I think that's just more so like a it's checks and balances. Just give you like something that you can make sure like you haven't missed any gaps or anything along those lines. But I would much rather prefer you actually have a POV on this and you go
Totally.
talk to somebody at your company or talk to a customer or talk to somebody and bring
Yeah.
that in and use that as the basis and then
Totally.
use our tooling to just fill in the gaps or be like, oh yeah, I should be talking about that, or this is like how I answer this question. And
Yeah.
I'd say like 80% of people don't want to do that. They're just like, no, like I actually just wanted to do my job for me. Which is hard because like I know that they're not going to get the results that their boss wants to see 6 months from now if they continue down this path.
I mean, like if you look at what you were saying as almost like a framework, right? What do they want? What does the business need? And then I'll add a third dimension, which is like, why do you feel like those things are what they are, right? So what does a content marketer actually like? Okay, let's start with the business. What does a business actually need, right? They need the content to like be good and convert, like fundamentally. Yes, more volume gives you more shots on goal, but if none of the posts convert, like if the posts convert at 0, you can have a million articles ranking. It does not matter fundamentally. And so I think you have to keep that trade-off in mind. And so, if you think about AI from like a business standpoint, letting the GPT do the thinking for you, like even if we want to be as kind as possible to GPT and be as generous as possible, like at best, it is just the average of the top 10 posts on the SERP, right? At best. Like imagine it captures all of them perfectly. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of freelance writers and in-house writers are trying to do when they write a post by hand is create, because we've given this like search intent is just what the top 10 posts are. And it's like, until it's not, like that's not a good way to determine search intent. And that as someone who was literally a PM at Google, like I hope that resonates. And so I think that in terms of what the business needs, AI doesn't cut it, right? In that regard, in writing the content, like it just doesn't. Now, as always, there's nuance. If you're doing a cluster with 10 posts and there's a 10th post that doesn't feel relevant to your business, but you feel like, well, based on what I'm seeing with internal links and the keyword analysis I'm doing with Google would rather I have that page than not, then sure, use AI for that 10th page and give them 10 off ramps to try to get them off that page as fast as possible so that it is only a door into the blog and not somewhere that they stand in the doorway, right? So that's the need part. I think like that's pretty clear to most people. And then the want part, I actually don't think content marketers want this to write for them. Almost every single, like I would say every single content marketer I know got into it at least somewhat because they liked writing. And some people get really stuck there where they like writing so much that moving up, managing people, doing reporting, all of the BS that comes with it is actually like very counter to why they got into it. And that creates a lot of conflict, right? Because they feel like they have to advance, but they don't want to do the things that are involved. And I think we need more strong IC paths for that, but that's a different conversation. And so if we like accept that content people like writing, or I don't like writing, I like having written. Okay. And there's a distinction there. So there's a book called Bird by Bird by, I think it's Anne Lamont. She has a chapter on shitty first drafts, which is to me the best description, like the chapter as a whole is the best description of like the writing process I've ever seen. There's literally a phrase or like a sentence in it where she's like, we all hate writing. I have a friend who gets up every morning and he's like, well, I have two options. I can write or I can kill myself, because he's like a novelist, right? So he feels like he has no choice. And she's like, and there's one person that we all know who has no trouble writing and we hate her. And so like, if you accept that, like the writing process is always going to be sticky and messy as a creative process. And then you add in all of the like business aspects that make it even more convoluted. Like, when people say they want the thing to write for them, I don't believe that. What I think they're saying is like, I want to like get to a final output that me and my boss are both happy with as fast as possible. And if I'm not going to be happy either way, then I would rather just get the output my boss wants, which is usually quantity, if that makes sense. So, and I think the why behind both of those is just like a misalignment of like how exec thinks about marketing in general and also content, and also a failure on our part as content leaders to bridge that gap and explain it to them more effectively. So I do think it is like a two-way street.
Let's actually talk about that. So you mentioned how ultimately, and I say this as the CEO of a small business, but ultimately all you care about is from marketing is qualified opportunities in the door, and how marketing gets there is almost besides the point, right? Whether you're doing pay, I mean, as long as the CAC overall makes sense, like how you get there doesn't matter at all for most companies. And so then what you start to realize is like, okay, like content is a vehicle or just like one way in which you achieve that goal. I think it's a great way in the sense that it can be very defensible. It's very low CAC, very scalable, and has a lot of great properties.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of companies don't exactly know like how to do it well, or a lot of the people who get into it don't actually understand this. And so here's what do you think that most like leaders don't understand about content and how AI is changing content in their head. They're like AI written content, and like their content team and maybe an agency are all these interchangeable things almost, which eventually get them this qualified opportunities goal. And so how would you like what do you think are like the mischaracterizations of like content marketing within these SaaS organizations, and what would be your advice to a content leader in terms of how to educate their management team on like, hey, like here's actually like why you're doing this, and have a business conversation so that they actually kind of grok it.
Okay. I wrote that down. I want to answer it for you. But if you'll humor me, I want to ask you a question before I answer that one. Is that
Go
okay?
for it.
Okay. So you know a little bit about the program we ran at Gorgias, going through the sales process with us, being a friend of mine. If on like October when I left, if you had to take over that program, which was very quality focused, very search focused, like we were going for search as a distribution channel, but we felt, and I still believe this, that any of those posts could have gone out on outbound, could have gone out on lead gen channels, could have been sent to customers. Like they were quality pieces, just optimized for search. And there was definitely like resources were something we thought about, and balancing the priorities of a lot of different people who had a lot of different ideas on how content should provide value to the business, even so much as like wanting us to be a lead gen channel and perform like this internal brand studio role where people can request things. So it's a lot of balancing, it's a lot of trade-offs, heavy emphasis on search. If you were to go into that role, what would you do? What would you say to that VP, knowing what you know as a founder who focuses on content, who has both of those angles, to start shifting that perception and get done what you think needs to be done?
Yeah. So I can only speak to this at the scale of business that I've run. Gorgias is a much larger business than Letterdrop. And so I think there's nuances about Gorgias that I simply do not understand because I've never been there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what I would maybe say is something along the lines of, hey, let's just forget about content. Let's forget about marketing. Let's just forget about everything. What do you want? Like, hey, CEO, or hey, board, what do you want? Like, what is the problem you're trying to solve for? Okay. Is the problem you're trying to solve for, I want like qualified opportunities in the door next month. Because if that's what you want, there's a certain type of activities that you can take to hit that number. Or is it like, actually, I care about qualified opportunities in the door over a 12-month period, in which case we would maybe approach this a little bit differently. Or is what you want, I want sales to win against competition purely on brand, in which case we'll do something completely different, right? And so there are all of
Yeah.
these goals that you as a leader need to sort of essentially juggle, and you need to give your team, hey, like here's the one goal that I actually care about right now, and I want this to be your North Star, and I am giving you permission to ignore a whole bunch of other stuff in order to fulfill this goal, and start from there and then work backwards from that. And I think what happens is a lot of CEOs, a lot of boards, they don't really understand marketing. And
Mm-hmm.
so they just point blank say like, hey, we just want everything. So do everything in the kitchen, throw everything in the kitchen sink in there. And then they get very upset or they get confused when these things play against each other and none of them really quite work out. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of how I would think about it. And then based on those goals, I would do very different things.
Yeah.
I would, in some cases, I would say like, hey, like you have infinite money, maybe, and you just care about like next month, forget content altogether, go for it. Or I'd say like, hey, you actually don't have infinite money, and your competition is winning, and they're the default, they're the status quo. I actually do think you need a content program, and specifically within the content program, here's how I think you need to think about demand capture versus demand generation, and
Mm-hmm.
where you need to invest your time. So that's
Okay.
kind of like my take on it. Is I think a lot of leaders just don't know what they want. They don't know how to have the conversation with marketing. I think a lot of marketing leaders don't know how to have that conversation with the CEO, with their sales counterparts, in terms of like what is possible, what is not possible.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just my my personal take on it, given like what I've seen from talking to and serving
Yeah.
hundreds of marketing teams, and also being the CEO of a small business.
So if I had to break that down and repeat it back to you to make sure I understand, it's basically like we need to align on the problems we're trying to solve. And then I'm going to make recommendations on how to solve those problems. And we need to align on that to make sure we're on the same page. And then we need to focus like pretty intensely on the thing that we have decided together will impact that. Right.
Yes, correct.
So yeah, I mean, like at a fundamental level, that's pretty much what I would do if I had to go back. So I think I'm trying to think. Okay, so the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to give advice to past Ryan, right? And I'm going to like recognize things that maybe could have been easier in the journey, but also like put that on myself and how I could have, because I can only impact me, right? Like, what could I have done to make those things easier? Because I think it is valid to be like, the other person on the other end of this is not meeting me in the middle, and that makes it tough, but you can't change that. So like, how do you change the rules of that game? So, based on what you said, so this kind of like align on the problems, align on the solution, and then work toward it with focus. I think the biggest problem for my tenure at Gorgias was the lack of focus. I had 5 bosses over my course of the 2 years. We had probably like 8 different OKRs in 8 quarters. And I think what I would take responsibility for as part of that is that I did not commit and put the flag in the sand, right? So if I was giving myself advice, that would 100% be the first thing I would say to me at any point in my time at Gorgias. It feels scary when you've never owned a number before to like, everyone sucks at forecasting in general. You suck especially because I suck. I'm talking to me. I sucked especially because it was my first time forecasting. Even people who are really good at it can't tell the future, right? And so it felt very scary to put a number up on the board and say, boom, I'm going to hit that. And so what I did instead was, and I didn't sandbag, but we left a lot of things vague. We changed things a lot. I wasn't willing to be like, give me 6 months and I'll do whatever you want on the search thing as long as we can agree that it's reasonable. And so I thought I was protecting myself. And fundamentally what I was doing was like abdicating the responsibility for setting those numbers to other people who set them then without my feedback, whether it's what the OKR is or like what the metric is on that OKR. You know what I mean? And so I felt like I was trying to control, and actually I gave up all the control. And so if I went back, I would rather commit hard to a number, but then be like, get out of my way and let me hit it then. And we'll talk when I miss it. And until then, I'm doing it my way. And I think that would have worked a lot better, because I think a lot of times when I wanted to do something and then we did something else, I still felt like what I wanted to do would have worked better, but I didn't get the chance because I missed on all of the work around the work. I was like, if I just do really good content and really good strategy, the rest will fall into place. But like, you can have the absolute perfect, like handed it down on a tablet from heaven content strategy, but if you can't get it done, you don't have a content strategy. You have an idea. You know what I mean? And so that's what I would probably change the most. And then just in general, like all the other things kind of ladder up to that, right? Focusing on something for longer and giving it like a fair experiment, right? Which again feels scary, feels uncertain. I have to go to my boss and say, I need 6 months for this to work. And then I have to explain why 6 months of work didn't work if it doesn't. You know what I mean? But the alternative is doing a different thing every month and then wondering why none of the experiments worked, which we didn't. We just kind of were like throwing spaghetti at the wall in that case. So I think really committing, really having a good understanding of like the levers of your program, how to move them. I wish I had done a better job of explaining is the wrong word. Aligning, I think, really is the word with my boss, because I think if I just feel like in general, the alignment is actually like, it's not that they don't understand content. I mean, sometimes they don't, but like I've definitely seen situations, I've been in situations where I'm like, you don't understand content. And even if that was true, it was on me because I'm the one that's there to explain it to them. So let's start there. The second thing is like, they may understand the fundamentals of content, but I'm not putting it in terms of what they can understand because I'm going too deep. I'm talking about backlinks. They don't know why the hell I'm doing that. You know what I mean? Like, and I think it's not like making it stupid for them. These are executives who got there because they're good at what they do, but it's like, it's almost like they explain like I'm 5, but instead it's like explain like I'm busy. You know what I mean? Like, what is like the 3 bullets on this that I need to know? Um, and also, I think something that we did a lot with our content documentation that I found really effective, and I'm trying to work it into my other forms of communication as well, is the toggle, right? Because the powerful thing about a toggle on like documentation is that it's there if they need it, but it's not overwhelming if they don't. They're only opening it if they need it. And I would tell people, freelancers and stuff, like, you don't have to read this whole thing. You read all the top level bullets and go deeper as needed. And I think that's also like a pretty good strategy for managing up to an exec. Like, here's the simple version that I have really tailored to like be persuasive. Okay, you're gonna have questions naturally. Let me focus the context and the detail in the areas you have questions and spend all of the time there instead of giving extra detail in an area where you were like, I was already good. You know what I mean? And so again, and for me, it's anxiety, right? You want to give all the context, you want to get it all out there to improve the chances of your thing that you want to happen happening. But it's not, objectively, it's the opposite. You're actually making it harder for the thing you want to get done. And I think it comes down to like insecurity a lot and ego on the other side of it. And the only ego should be results too, right? So like I have 100% had times in meetings where I probably could have convinced someone that it was their idea and gotten it through, but I couldn't let go of the credit. You know what I mean? And so, and then it just didn't happen. Then no one got credit. There's no one wins. So, I think if you really focus on like the results are all that matters, and I would add the people, your relationships with people in the org, those do matter also and are very real and impact the work. But like, I don't know. I've never seen, I don't know, maybe you have, I've never seen a VP of marketing where content is like creating all of this revenue opportunity and pipeline. And they're reading the blogs like, yeah, but I don't know if it's high enough quality, or like, I'm not really, vibing with the topic of this blog. They're only asking questions when the pipeline dries up, right? So keep it going and then they'll stay out of your way. Because at the end of the day, if someone that is not a micromanager, some people just micromanage, but if someone that's not a micromanager is micromanaging you, it's because you've given them a reason to feel insecure about your part of the deal, right? Either you're not communicating enough, or you're not communicating well, or they're not feeling like things are on the right track. Benjamin Elias has an amazing, amazing newsletter called Diamond Pencils that I would recommend anyone subscribe to. I literally read it before HBR. Like if I'm searching for a specific topic, I want to hear Benjamin's take. And his most recent one was in like February. It was basically like, I'm now a meddling executive, and before that, I really disliked meddling executives. And like, here's the thought process. You know what I mean? And so I think we need to be open as like middle managers to understanding that perspective, and all of that. I can like make all the excuses for the things that were harder than they needed to be, and maybe some of those things are valid. But if I had committed to my number, given like a really clear plan, communicated all of the iterations and changes along the way, I probably would have had a better time getting those things done and gotten more results. And all these things that I tried to do that felt like armor or like security to me actually made me more insecure because they pissed off the person who's there to advocate for me. And so recognizing that, like, the work around the work is the work, basically. There's a lot changing, right? Which is always true. But like I said, with a lot of changes in the past, they came out of nowhere. And AI has this kind of interesting thing where it is every new release coming out of nowhere, but we know that it's coming, and it has this kind of looming feeling, right? And so I think people are, reacting naturally in the way that people react when they feel insecure and feel like threatened, like the future is uncertain, that they don't have control over the situation. And, we're all figuring it out together, but you have to take your head out of the sand. You have to go and do the things, and you're going to fail, and you have to go do it again and keep notes so you don't fail twice in the same way. And yeah, I think your boss is trying their best. I rip on VP of marketing as much as anyone else, but at the end of the day, they're the one that has to go into the CEO and board meetings and get railed on their pipeline numbers. So when you're not delivering your part of that pie, naturally, they're not going to be happy with you. I think if you can just focus on communicating with your boss better and solving the problems they want solved and aligning, like you said, Parthi, with the things that they believe and making sure they align with the things that you believe, then I think a lot of the rest becomes a lot easier. I don't see many content people who struggle is like ranking content. It's usually like getting the things done that need to be done in the process. That's the issue.
Absolutely. I feel like everybody is working through like the same challenges right now, and it's fun to see you guys all talking about the same stuff. So thanks for joining, Ryan, and would love to jam with you again sometime when I'm in New York.
Yeah.